Falcon!
Alright, time for some more anime and manga that make me happy. First up we have Fumi Cooly, which is a pretty special anime to me personally, as it's one of my most rewatched anime, and that's not because of its 6-episode length. I've made it a bit of a tradition of mine to rewatch this series every year since high school, usually right before the academic year started in high school and throughout university. Watching the final episode the day of a new semester is just magical to me, as there's just an indescribable feeling I get whenever I wrap up Fumi Cooly, this chaotically one-of-a-kind story of growing up and the various emotions that come along with it. Now, like many, when I first watched Fumi Cooly, I thought it was weird. Maybe not as weird as many made it out to be, since if you've been with me on this channel for a while now, you know I've encountered way stranger. But I just didn't understand a whole lot about it in my first viewing. Which, looking back, I'm kind of shocked, since I don't think Fumi Cooly is actually that hard to follow, or at least get the general gist of. But like, I was probably a stupid middle schooler when I first saw it, so whatever. However, sometime after my first watch through, the series kept popping back in my mind. Eventually, in order to hopefully get more of the series, I checked out the manga, which had some differences from the anime, but even after that, I wasn't fully satisfied, so I rewatched the anime again. And that time I got a lot more out of it. More started to click with me outside of its amazing visuals and action set pieces. I began to feel like I understood and connected more with the anime. And after making watching Fumi Cooly an annual rewatch thing, that feeling continued. I understood more of its themes of growing up, sex, and what makes for true maturity. But I also got to understand a lot more of the references each year. As when I first watched Fumi Cooly, I had no idea what Evangelion or Lupin III were. But even more surprising, in a rewatch I had a few years ago, I realized that the series opens up with an Ishida no Joe reference. Which is a small moment, but it felt a whole lot bigger to me, as it was absolutely wild, as the series I had been rewatching for at least 6 years at that point still had something new for me. Which, in a way, this progression with my understanding of the anime each year kind of felt like every rewatch was, in a weird way, like a measure of personal growth, both as an anime fan and just a person, as I got more out of the series every year, which is just a special relationship I've never had with any other anime. Now that my days of school and university are over, I can safely say I got all I can out of it. But that still doesn't stop my annual rewatch. I mean, for starters, the series just kicks ass, with its amazing visuals and super over-the-top action set pieces, a lot of which are forever ingrained into my brain. Then of course you have the music by The Pillows, which is spectacular, with The Pillows being the first Japanese band I properly gave a listen to outside of anime openings, and a lot of my high school days were spent listening to their music. Music that just blends so damn well with Fumi Cooly, to the point that Fumi Cooly almost just feels like a monstrous AMV with a storyline stapled on. So many scenes are just elevated because of the music. Whenever I hear songs like Hybrid Rainbow, One Life, or Blue Dry's Monster, I can't help but have their entire correlating scene pop up in my head. Speaking of Blue Dry's Monster, it's connected to one of my favorite episodes of Fumi Cooly, and possibly one of my favorite episodes of anime ever. Episode 5, Brittle Bullet. Easily the most kick-ass episode of Fumi Cooly, with all of its chaotic shootouts that never fail to get me hyped. I just love Fumi Cooly. It's such a unique series that only comes every once in a while and just can't be duplicated. They tried with alternative and progressive, but they just didn't have the spark and soul the original had. Fumi Cooly will forever be an anime I will always make time for. Up next, we have another anime I checked out pretty early into me getting into anime, being Mahou Romantic. Now this one requires a bit more context, so we're just going to talk about middle school aged FalconPunch for a bit here. Now, as I mentioned in volume 1 of this video series, I got into anime through a very unorthodox way, being thanks to Dragon Ball Evolution. Though luckily it meant that the first proper anime I watched all the way through was the original Dragon Ball, which I really enjoyed, especially with how different it was compared to a lot of the cartoons I grew up with. Around that point in time, I didn't really know that much about anime and the wide scope of it that was out there, due to having no one really to talk about it with, along with the fact that the only computer my family had at the time was just a super clunky piece of junk. However, around that time, the on-demand service we had just so happened to have an anime category. Though the selection was very small, just a handful of series like Kaiba, Wedding Peaches, Boogie Bop Phantom, and a few others I can't really remember. However, none of those series interested me at the time, as there were 3 other series that caught my eye, being UFO Princess Ultra Maiden, This Ugly Yet Beautiful World, and Mahou Romantic. Now, these 3 series didn't necessarily catch my attention because they seemed really cool or hype, but because they featured a whole lot of fan service. Mind you, younger Falcon was a super goody two-shoes. Like, for real, I never said the words stupid, shut up, or dumb till like I was 14, because in my mind, for whatever reason, those were almost the equivalent of using a proper curse word. I lived a super clean and rated G life. And personally, I think the best way to display that is that when I first got the Shadow the Hedgehog video game, I thought it was way too hardcore for me. I'm not kidding you, I legit locked my door when playing it since I thought it was something I shouldn't have been playing. The edge was just too powerful. But as you can tell, times have certainly changed for me. But getting back on track, around this time I was a growing boy, a preteen, one who had lived a pretty innocent life. Despite living in Las Vegas for a good amount of my life, I had no clue what porn was till someone told me about it later on in middle school. The first time I saw tantalizing imagery of the female form was in Dragon Ball with Bulma. So of course, like any growing boy at that age seeing animated titties for the first time, I kinda wanted more. Which is where those 3 animes I mentioned earlier came in handy. And this time, rather than just normal teasing fan service, I got full, uncensored animated titty. I lost my squeaky clean innocence and gained weeb-powered degeneracy. Now, for Ultra Maiden and This Ugly Yet Beautiful World, I don't remember that much about them other than just skipping around to getting to the scenes I originally went to them for. Thinking back on it, I don't even think This Ugly Yet Beautiful World was a proper ecchi series. I just really skipped around to get to those parts. Again, I was young, I had no idea what porn was, and I had a super slow computer, which, when looking back on that, I'm sort of glad. I can only imagine the type of degenerate I would be if I had high-speed internet back then. However, with Mahou Romantic, after skipping around, I became pretty interested in it and wanted to properly sit down and watch it. It's a series I came for titty in more ways than one. Okay, that was stupid. I'm sorry. But stayed for a cute story following an even cuter android maid who could also occasionally kick a lot of ass. So of course, for my younger brain, this series blew my mind. As I watched it in secret at 5 AM, the time I naturally woke up in the morning for some reason around those times, as well as definitely the safest to be watching the series in the family living room. No, I actually really enjoyed Mahou Romantic. Despite how horny the series could be, it still had an air of innocence and warmth to it, thanks to its setting and story. A lot of moments and even music tracks like the ones playing right now in this video just feel very cozy. After finishing Mahou Romantic for the first time, I kinda moved on. As around that time we were moving from Las Vegas to Dubai, and for my first month in Dubai we didn't have a proper internet connection. However, once I did, I started getting more and more into anime, and much later down the line towards the end of high school, I decided to rewatch Mahou Romantic for a mini nostalgia trip, where I even realized that the show had a second season, which surprisingly ends in quite a bummer. Regardless, it felt good going back to a series I watched when I knew little of anime as a medium, now slightly older and more familiar. But it's around that rewatch where I realized something. This early 2000s ecchi comedy that I initially watched with not the greatest intentions somehow interwoven itself with very pure and innocent memories. Odd, as the series had played a pretty large role in corrupting that pure boy innocence, but I guess that in itself is why it invokes those feelings and memories in the first place. Back then, this series was super mind-blowing, and I guess embarrassing as it may be, it felt pretty special. You know, awakening a new side of me as a preteen, and watching it felt kinda rebellious. with it being a show I knew I definitely was not allowed to watch, but I did so anyway in the family living room big screen TV at 5 a.m. It was certainly a thrill ride for me. Mahou Romantic may not be a series I think back on as much as something like Fumi Cooly, but whenever I do, I'm taken back to a much simpler and innocent time in my life. Just sweet, innocent youth. Now up next we have what is most likely going to be the shortest entry to be made in this video series, and that's for Dorohedoro. And the reason for that is because you guys already know I fucking love Dorohedoro. I've made plenty of videos on it in my channel, and I just don't want to repeat myself too much. You could go back and rewatch my other videos on Dorohedoro. It's simply one of my favorite mangas of all time, so of course it makes me happy whenever I think about it. So yeah, I just wanted to get that out of the way because it felt really weird not including my favorite series of all time in a list where I talk about series that make me happy. But with that, we're going to get into the final series on this volume, being Detroit Metal City. Now, unlike a lot of the anime and manga I talk about in this series, Detroit Metal City doesn't have any deep emotional or personal stories attached to it. It's just simply one of my favorite comedy series in all of its headbanging, rude, and crude glory. DMC is the first anime and manga that pops into my mind whenever someone asks me for comedy recommendations. I've recommended this series to so many people, and I even remember showing off the first couple episodes in my university's anime club, and everyone got a kick out of it, headbanging to the opening and laughing along. Even some of the people that claimed they were above rude humor were holding back their smiles by the end of the first episode. It's also one of the few manga series I own all the volumes for, and I always get this burst of pride whenever I look at my full collection of Detroit Metal City. And that's mainly because when I lived in Dubai, I bought a majority of my manga from a store called Kinokuniya, which was also just one of my favorite places to be for obvious reasons. Since at least when I lived in Dubai, there wasn't really that many other methods of buying manga. And as much as I love the store, at least in the Dubai location I went to, it always seemed to have low stocks on series I was interested in, or straight up would just stop carrying new volumes for certain series. I remember being really pissed off when I realized that the location I went to just stopped carrying the new volumes of Dorohedoro somewhere after volume 13, which luckily once I moved back to America, I was able to buy the whole series. I bought all of Detroit Metal City there. However, in the many years I lived in Dubai since completing my collection of DMC, I never saw volumes 6 through 10 get back in stock. So in the remaining years I lived there, it just felt like I bought the last copies of those volumes and no one else could have them. It's kind of stupid, but whenever I passed by the shelf that had Detroit Metal City in Kinokuniya, and I saw that they never restocked 6 through 10, I was always kind of like, fuck yeah, I got those all to myself. I'm actually curious if those volumes ever came back to that store, so if you're in Dubai, maybe tell me about it. Anyways, this is probably the most personal volume of this video segment so far, so I hope you guys enjoyed it. As always, I am Mr. FalconPunch. Stay safe. Peace out.